Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hybrid Chats. I think it's this one is number 6. And in Hybrid Chats, I sit down with my fellow guest, John Reardon, chairman of Grow Remote. I'm Irina Jambazova, head of marketing in Boundless. And wherever in the world we are, John and I hop on a call and we talk about all the things, information, data, opinions that has come out in the previous month on remote, hybrid, flexible, in office, out of office, and all that. There's certainly each month there's never been a shortage, and so is this month. Today I'm in Dublin. I'm actually working from home. Where are you today, John?
I am joining today from Mizenhead in West Cork, so I have a very tough kind of view there that I've got to
Very
look
nice.
out the window to every day. So yeah, it's this remote work thing. It's a good thing.
It's a good thing. Yeah, I would
It's
say
good for the soul, good for the heart.
it's good for the soul. I don't think a lot of offices come with that sort of view. Now, my view is not like yours. I'm not going to show it. It's a bit of rear window kind of situation, kind of eavesdrop on the neighbors. But that's life in Dublin. So we're going to kick off with surprise, surprise, our absolute favorite academic, Nick Bloom. I think at
Yeah,
this point, I feel like I know him. We talk so
yeah.
much about him. I really want to meet him. And I'll see him on the street and be like, "Hi, Nick," and he'll be like, "Who are you?" But he came up with something really cool this month, which
Mm,
is he tried to quantify this work from home thing. You have a nice view. I'm not sure we can quantify that. It's good for the soul, but not sure we can quantify this. But he actually went and tried to quantify, and he put top 5 benefits that we know are working from home benefits, and he tried to quantify them. So bear with me as I read them. Commute time savings of about an hour a day average. Commute cost savings of about $20 a day, along with reduced pollution. Flexibility, which is part of the 8% pay increase employees value when working from home. And we've talked about this before. Like when they try to quantify flexibility, they equate it to an 8% increase of
mm,
the salary. Time saved on grooming. I think both you and I look forward to talking about that one.
mm.
Apparently, we save about 10 minutes a day. I think we will have some questions on that one. And then quiet time, which boosts innovation through thinking time, as Adam Grant mentions. So let's break this down one by one.
Okay. So just bear with me for a while here because I'm going to take a little bit of time to dig into this one. And look, as with all of the research that comes from Nick Bloom and his merry band of fellow Stanford academics, there's a tremendous amount of value in the data that they collect, but there's an even more value in the insights that they attach to those data points. So, like this group, they continue to churn out probably the most important research data in this field. And again, I think I've said it on previous sessions. WFHresearch.com comes out every month. And to me, it's probably the most important bit of research that comes in this space. And it's always interesting, always fascinating, and there's always a twist. In fact, this particular, the one that's coming out currently, they did an analysis of golf in the US, and they came up with a very interesting conclusion. And people need to go off and find it and read it to really understand it. But what they've actually shown is that the number of rounds of golf in the midweek has actually gone up. So of course that can be latched onto by some people saying, "Oh, a bunch of slacker people working from home." But what it's actually done is people who are working from home are making conscious choices to play golf at what was historically a quieter time during the week. So they're able to fit their fix of a game of golf in at that time and build their work around it. So it's actually a net gain. And in fact, the number of rounds of golf has actually significantly increased. And what they now talk about is that Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays on golf courses are like weekends. So it's basically all the one. Anyway, it's a very interesting bit of data, and how they constructed the data and how they constructed the analysis is a real window into the soul of folks like that. But I digress. So anyway, this whole WFHresearch.com, if you have any interest at all in this remote hybrid kind of workspace, this seminal piece of research, which is WFHresearch.com, like I said, comes out on a monthly basis, should be your starting point each month. And if you are involved from a leadership perspective, particularly, I would encourage people to look at that and read it. And if you can only read the summary of it and the data insights, it's a really good place to start the month. And the key thing is the data sets that they're using, many of them, they've been tracking them for multiple years. And like I said, like the golf research, they always dip in and look for another bit of research. In fact, I'm trying to help Nick. I've connected Nick with a couple of other people in a related space. I'll leave Nick do the analysis and the depth and the reveal of it at a later stage. But there's a far greater thing in terms of activity that they're going to be able to dive into over the course of the next couple of months. And I'm very happy to say that I'm kind of one of the people behind the scenes making some of the connections so that they can actually get access to some really good, interesting data sets. So hopefully I'll get a bit of an advanced insight on some of that. Anyway, so there were five key insights. So let's take a quick look at those recent insights that you just laid out. So the first one was commute time savings of an hour a day. Now, this is a fascinating piece of data because all the research has shown that the extension of commuting time does actually have a negative impact on many aspects of how people engage with their job. There's a 2022 paper that was presented in the very august sounding International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. And it found that the longer the commute, no shit, the lower the satisfaction with work and the lower the satisfaction with life. So repeat that again, the longer the commute. Should be a no-brainer for most people, but the longer the commute, the lower the satisfaction.
Is there a threshold in there?
Well, it is. There's a very interesting threshold in there. There's another piece of research I remember, and I don't have the exact piece of data, and I'll try to dig it out later. But the threshold seems to be around 26, 27 minutes. So once your commute goes beyond 26, 27 minutes, sorry, excuse me, it was 36 or 37 minutes. Once the commute goes beyond that, people start making decisions about whether or not they stay in the job and or whether or not they stay in the house where they live. So that's the tipping point. Typically, once you go beyond that, it becomes onerous and becomes a challenge. So you may well hear anecdotal comments about people saying, oh, I really relish the commute because I jump on, I put the AirPods on, and I get ready for work, or I decompress after work and all that. And that's totally understandable. It's a totally understandable thing. But to your point, there is a tipping point beyond which it just becomes a drag. So anyway,
yeah, I suppose it's the length of a podcast, right? 35
correct.
minutes. Oh, good. From
correct.
then on, they should start listening to us. We tend to go
correct.
45. So
yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to get through this point fairly quickly, and we've only got through about 1/5 of it. So, but like the length of the commuting time, like this research is showing that it can cause damage to health, it can affect physical health, and it can also drive a level of inactivity. So, like one of the things from an Irish perspective that we've got to be careful about is that between the 2011 and 2016 census, the average commute in Ireland went up from 26 minutes to 28 minutes. It might not sound like much, but if you extend that, if you draw a line through that, and if you had assumed that was going to continue to increase, we would rapidly be getting to a situation where we were going to get to that inflection point in the mid 30 minutes of a commute. However, it'll be really interesting to see in the next census analysis whether that commute time has actually gone down in Ireland because so many people working remote.
Yeah.
But I think overall, like, I think that the time wasted commuting, and I'm going to use that arbitrary term, wasted commuting, is just one of the things that's driving the change in workplace dynamics. But I think the next things that we need to move on to is the net result of that commute, which is the second point in Nick's comment, was the commute cost savings of about $20 per day, along with reduced pollution. Now, if you're not pissed off at the waste of time, then the cost of that commute should and probably will get under your skin a whole lot more. So $20 a day works out at approximately $5,000 a year, $5,000 a year after tax. Like after $5,000, like in the Irish tax structure, you're talking about, needing to earn somewhere between 8 and 10 grand a year to pay off the $5,000. And what are you doing that for? It's a significant chunk of your income, and you've proven over the last couple of years, more than likely, that a large part of your work can be done in a place outside of the office. So it's a very large cost to incur to keep somebody else happy that you need to be in a place where you've actually proven you don't need to be. So I think really another way to phrase that is the more time that we've spent at home over the past 3 years, the more time that we've had to focus on the fact whether it's really needed or not. That leads into the one other point on the pollution perspective. I think we've all we've all done a bit more introspection, a little bit more reading, a little bit more. We've seen a whole lot more about the climate impact. And it's now front and central in a lot of conversations about your own personal carbon. You can't now ignore your own personal carbon footprint, your own personal use of resources. So, clearly, if you are not commuting and not traveling, you're going to have a lower carbon footprint. So that just comes with the territory. The third point they talked about is flexibility, and I think Nick put a really good one, which was this is the point of the 8% pay increase value that you get working from home. So the WFH research team has produced some really, really good data that shows that employees that employees value this working from home as the equivalent of 8% of salary. And the key thing here is that employers should take note of this. Now, the nefarious employers out there would probably take note of it and go, here I have an opportunity to, if I allow somebody to go work from home, I'll take 8% off their salary and they'll still be happy. No. That's not how to look at it. And fortunately, very few, if any, employers have done that. However, there were discussions in 2020 and 2021 where some employers were actually floating out the idea that people who work remote should be paid a lower salary. But fortunately, that seems to have died from a discussion. But I think what employers need to recognize and understand is the value equation that your human capital, your employees, are actually computing for this benefit, which is working from home. And the data would indicate that it's about an 8% value. So if you take that away, what you're basically saying to your employees is, I am docking you 8% of the value of your salary. And I think what we'll also see is that a lot of negotiations, labor negotiations and employee labor negotiations in the past have been around salary, and this is a non-monetary salary element that will probably be on the table for discussion between labor and management far into the future. So to have that number from Nick and the team is a very good one to have on the table. Now, the fun one. So time saved on grooming. So clearly, I like in the past, would I have shown up unshaven and unkempt like this? Probably or probably not. And I would say that my own, and then again, this is the worst possible way to answer this question, is assuming that my opinion of how I do it is reflective of everybody else. But I'll just give the personal insight first. I don't give a monkeys, and I'm kind of half on vacation here, and I'm not going to shave, and I'm going to be on camera, and I've got used to it over the last 3.5 years, and I am what I am, and I don't care. That's not reflective of everybody. So to see this research, it's very interesting. Is that from an overall perspective, what people are saying when they're being asked this question is they're computing that they're spending approximately 10 minutes less per day, whether it be certain aspects of the way they dress, the way they groom themselves, whatever it is. So this is what the data is sharing or is showing. Now, roll that up. That's the equivalent, like 10 minutes a day is the equivalent of 43 hours 43 hours, right? That's one working week, right? And that's just by, let's call it down ticking the amount of time on grooming. Now, there's another fascinating aspect to all of this grooming thing is that what the pandemic showed us is that we're now in a, let's call it a much more enhanced video world, which we wouldn't have been in before. So what has that done? Now, what the video world has done is it has put us in a situation where instead of being in a conference room and having a discussion with people, right, you're now on video. So what's the difference between the two? When you're in a conference room, you don't see yourself, right? But when you're on video, there you are, and you actually see yourself. So people are very attuned. So, I might be the type of individual who says, I don't care. But there are plenty of people who see themselves on screen and they really do care. So that grooming time, so you can't, and the reason I'm saying this is don't ever think that your opinion trumps the data set. The data is very clear. 10 minutes a day is the time savings, but still there's plenty of time spent on grooming. There's another interesting insight in all of this is it's a company in Ireland, the Sisu Clinic, Botox, aesthetics, etc. And they referred to their business taking off like a hockey stick in 2020. And the founders of the company referred to it as the Zoom boom because everybody was suddenly seeing themselves on camera and saying, ooh, yeah, I need to get that done. So there are significant aspects of this new world of work where we see ourselves on a regular basis that does drive an increase in grooming. But from an overall perspective, what the WFH research team are saying is that the overall time spent on grooming for people who work from home compared to people who are getting ready to go to an office is about a 10-minute saving. So overall, it's one working week. And then the last one is the Adam Grant comment about quiet time, which boosts innovation through thinking time. Now, we've addressed a similar point in some of our prior discussions. The interchange of quiet time, as in at home, and let's call it connected time, let's call that in the office, is actually a good thing. So to have a bit of both is really, really interesting. And my perception of it is that we all have peaks and troughs in our work output. We have peaks and troughs in our concentration. We have peaks and troughs in our energy levels. So to have designated quiet time, and for that I mean sort of a set number of days at home, that has been shown in the research by the WFH research team to be a productivity enhancer. So when you're able to mix the two and you're able to have intentional deep focus time, and also the opportunity to collaborate with other people, as in going into an office, that's the best of both worlds. That's a hybrid done really well. So I think that one of the main insights in 2023 that the Stanford team has coalesced around is that hybrid done well and done intentionally shows up clearly as potentially the most productive way of working. So this really forces the discussion, which we've had on a couple of occasions, which we need to continue, which is it's not remote or office, it's remote and office. And a really deliberate, intentional thoughtful way to incorporate both the quiet time and the connected time is important. So what I would say is there is a lot more going to happen in this space, and we're only 3 years and 4 months into this, 3 years and 5 months into this craziness. So we're not even a toddler yet. We're barely a toddler, should I say, at this stage. There's a lot more to come, and I think over the course of the next couple of years, you'll see a heck of a lot more research come out in this arena. But that merging of deep thinking time and connected time, to me, appears to be the magic.
Yeah, same. And I think as we talked last episode, it's really that deliberateness in mentoring, in upskilling, that we miss. And like I certainly, when I work from home, yes, I am more productive because I am less distracted, but I also miss the connectedness and put a value to that, right? But I'll let you take a breath after this. I think I'm still on the fence on the grooming side of things, because I do think that, certainly, again, my personal experience, I think being on video all the time has made me a lot more self-conscious, to the point where I think there was a study done where the impact that being on video all the time to the mental health, particularly of women, surprise,
Yeah.
surprise, it's actually deteriorating, to the point where the advice is, and certainly I know of women who do that, they switch off the self view and they only look at the person. And apparently that makes a massive difference to how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
So my grooming certainly hasn't gone down. But yeah, I think it's really a personal thing. But what I'm curious here is like, okay, so we have these benefits, right? And they're very tangible thanks to Nick Bloom's work. And yet we keep on having return to office, return to office, return to office. And Forbes has a really interesting article where it talks about the fact that if managers want to lure, and they literally use the word lure, people back, they're going to have to bring in some really serious incentives here. But the incentives they're going to have to bring in are kind of different than the incentives that were there before the pandemic, because the problems are different, the pains are different. Like, you've tasted flexibility and now it's taken away from you. You've retrofitted your office, or your home, to fit your office, to make it a more of an office. And you've put in money for a desk, for a chair, whatever. You go play golf in the middle of the week, right? So that is very difficult to offset with something that they're going to give you. So, free childcare or subsidies for commuting, food in the office, which I still don't think that works, are put as things that maybe might do the job. What do you think? Does anything do the job?
No, I think if you go back to kind of 2015, 16, 17, 18, there was, and you've heard the expression many times. People, oh, the office was so Google-like. In other words, there were whimsical things in the office. There was free food. There was, you know, uh, there was fridges with Coke cans and every snack that you'd ever want. And if you actually think of what was happening here, is employers were putting as many things into the office as possible to encourage people to go in very early and stay very late. I one of the companies I worked at, you could get breakfast, lunch, and dinner there, albeit you paid for it, but excellent quality food. But if you were, for example, had moved to that particular city, you would have had 5 days a week, literally no need to do any kind of cooking, any shape, size, or form, because it was all there for you. It was a self-contained work camp, and you could be there from 7 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. So it was there. It was a point of attraction. But that was a very different era. We're now in a different time. So what employers need to offer, I think is very different. And I'm going to actually answer the question I'm going to invert the question a little bit, because what's the time of we're recording this in early August, and what we're going to see happen in the rest of August, more than likely, if we see a repeat of this, because we saw it in the last 3 years, 20, 21, and 22, is a lot of the companies and major North American companies will be out hammering this message through the month of August. And the tipping point for them is Labor Day, which is early September in the US. And it's going to be the return to office. We got to, everybody's going to return to the office. The headlines will be there that company X is everybody's returning to the office. Actually, that's not the case. And Irina, you and I know this. It's the company are saying we are going to try again to encourage people to go back to the office. And by encouraging, there's subtle comments made about there will be discipline, there will be ramifications if you don't. It's all bluster. So like each of the last 3 years, you've seen all of these companies make these. Each year, the needle has flickered, but it hasn't really moved. So clearly these RTO mandates, return to office mandates, or other people love to call it RTP, return to the past mandates, they haven't been effective. So let's talk about a couple of reasons why that hasn't worked. Employees clearly aren't interested in rolling back the gains that they've made. That genie's not going back in the bottle. We've talked about the 8% salary value, talked about the commuting time being huge. There's the work-life balance gain. There's so much more family time, more time in the community, more time for hobbies. And then for some, the mental health gain of having greater control is massive. And albeit this is counterbalanced by people who struggle with the loneliness of work from home. And that's an altogether different element, which we can get into on a future pod. But so now let's look at the employers for a second. When you issue a policy like this RTO policy, there's this usual or else, okay, which is it's a nice way of saying we're going to enforce the policy. But what's absolutely clearly happened is that the leaders and managers who are expected to enforce this are not doing it. So my request to anybody out there is, I personally haven't heard of a single person who's been fired for not returning to the office as mandated. And if anybody listening hears of a case of somebody being fired because they haven't returned to the office, please correct me, because I'd love to know who it is. So for all of the bullshit that we've heard about companies returning to the office, all they're doing is they're exhorting people, they're begging people to do it. People aren't doing it. And I would say that we should all keep an eye over the next month on which employers go out there again and start hammering this point about RTO mandates. And then we'll go back and have a look at the research again in November and December. And what we'll see is the needle will probably flicker. You might find a half a point change on a base of 25, 26 percentage points. So it'll be nothing. It'll be minor.
Yeah. No, it's every time we have the return to office articles, it's always it's an interesting one, because you have all the data otherwise. Just let people do what they want. Let them play golf on a Tuesday if they want, because I think we have to really rethink productivity. And there's actually a really interesting study that Slack did, which is around productivity. There's so much talk about it. I think we've mentioned the word productivity every time on our conversations. And I think a lot of people equate productivity to sitting down on a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the guys in Slack went after. They did a study of, I think, 19,000 desk workers. They did it with Qualtrics. And like what they wanted to answer as a question is, what makes you productive? But before they started answering that one, they went for, what is productivity? Is it sitting on the computer for a few hours, whatever it is, 8, 9, or is it output? And it doesn't matter when you do the output. It doesn't matter that for a couple of hours on a Tuesday, you go playing golf and then you come home and you do a bit of work and then cook a meal for the kids, put them to bed, and then do a couple more hours
Yeah.
and you do your work. But it turns out, and what Slack found out, is there's a crazy number of people, like in the 50s, 60s, 70s%, that want to or need to appear there online. So they may not be working, but the computer is on, Slack is on,
Correct.
they appear as available. And it's just like these, it's theater a little bit. Like I will appear
Yep.
online so people think that I'm working. So I think this all brings us to, being in the office. The fact that I'm sitting in a computer doesn't mean I'm doing anything. But I'm curious what you make of the findings that
Well,
Slack had.
yeah, I mean, I think like really the question here is, so, what's going on with productivity, and are people feeling that they're being forced into producing all the time? Look, to me, the key to this is it's setting boundaries. And I think it starts with the employer. A good employer or a great leader or strong manager is the type of person, and he or she will lead by example and be very clearly intentional about work hours. And in the perfect world, there really should be no mystery, but there should also be no guilt. So what I would encourage people to do before they actually sign up to work for a company, assuming somebody is looking at a company as a place to work for a second, or a department within moving to a different department in the same company, is be very aware of the underlying culture of that company, that department, that division. And if it's one of these groups or companies that has this always on culture where productivity is almost measured by presenteeism as opposed to output, then you've got to be aware of that. So if it does have this always on culture where you're from a Slack perspective, you're always appearing to be active and you feel that you need to be active all the time and available, ask yourself the question, is this your jam? And if it isn't, be very honest with yourself and reflect that this job may not be for you. So, I think, I driving productivity through an always on type of culture may work in the short term. So it might have short term benefits, but in my opinion, it's doubtful that it will last in the long run in this much different and newer work landscape. So it's very interesting research from Slack. And I think it's very intuitive and introspective of them, because they're a tool where it's actually to their benefit that people are always on and always active. So for them to publish this research, I think, is commendable.
Absolutely, and really interesting. And I think the use of Slack, that doesn't tell you anything about if someone's using Slack, whether they're in office or at home or hybrid or anything. If anything, Slack allows for to be on the go, because, well, there's always Slack to communicate with. But I think and you've talked a lot about this before, around async communication. I think Slack, just like WhatsApp or any kind of messaging tool, creates the urgency. And that's not necessarily created by the person sending the message, but the person receiving the message. There's a little bit of like, oh God, I messaged on Slack, I better respond. Unlike, say, an email where that urgency doesn't exist. So it's a little bit what makes us very connected, also makes us more pressured into answering.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to using the tools properly, and also having a team culture, a division culture on it. Like I see some great. I've worked with some great teams where the people are very clear in their Slack status, and the same applies for all the other multiple tools. So I'm just using Slack sort of as a generic term, where you put your work hours, and don't be in any way concerned, embarrassed by this. These are the hours I work, and to me, it actually shows a vibrant culture in an organization. And I would be very nervous, and I always am nervous, of somebody who replies to essentially an asynchronous type message, replies to it off hours at a time when they really shouldn't be replying. And I'm very careful and very conscious when I reply to be it a text message or a Slack message at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. I try to make sure that that people are aware that I'm doing it because I'm actually bored and just tooling around. It's not my expectation that this is the standard. I think we've got to be very, very careful about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I used to work for a company where the CEO, his commute was like an hour and a half on a train, right? The office was in London, but he lived kind of an hour and a half away with the train. So he'd only come in like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And he needed to get like a really early train. He'll be all caffeinated already. So what he'll do on this train for an hour and a half is respond to Slack messages, but also send new Slack messages. And that was really unhealthy, because what happened is, and that's why when I removed Slack from my phone, I would wake up at like, say, 8 or whatever, and then there will be just like a plethora of messages. And I was like, that's the first thing I do. I haven't had a coffee, I haven't had a breakfast, I haven't had a minute to make sense of my dreams, whatever. And I'm already seeing these messages. And it was just, it's already, my day has started, and it's already pressuring me. And at some point, we had to bring up this thing that messages out of hours are not allowed, because it just creates so much unhealthiness. But I also removed Slack from my phone. That was, I want to say at this point, 5 or 6 years ago. I've never put Slack back, which arguably is not great, because sometimes there is urgent things that I need to address. But I'm just like, no, I am not doing this to my mental health, because I don't trust the person on the other side.
I think we could all learn an awful lot. We kind of snigger every now and then, but we could all learn an awful lot from the French approach in this. And I remember 4, 5, 6 years ago, when the first article came out, or first commentary came out, about the proposal in France to make the sending of emails beyond like 6 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah, the right to disconnect.
The right to disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, working for a North American company, and people were like looking down their nose, like the lazy French and all this sort of stuff. You know what? They were, in my book, they're light years ahead, setting boundaries. Now, a little bit heavy-handed, is a little bit, to do it in terms of from a legislative perspective, but it sets a tone, which is, we're looking at the whole person, not just the working person. And I think in the long run, I think history is going to be very kind to the way in which the French approach it. I think history will be very kind, for example, to countries like New Zealand, who have prioritized people's happiness over GDP growth as an economic indicator. And I think we all, and I know it's going to sound like, very liberal and wokish and all sorts of, but you know what? There are significant aspects of nurturing the person and nurturing the individual that need to be brought in to the mix and looked at with a bunch of much more, I suppose, economic metrics. And I would take my hat off to the French, even though I was one of the people who sniggered and looked down my nose when that came out first. I apologize.
Okay. On behalf of the ones that were always like, fair play, France, I accept your apology. You've been exonerated. But it's a really interesting one, that one, because I remember when the pandemic started, and obviously there was no disconnect, it was a complete mix. We started tracking which countries will follow suit. because we were very interested, because I've been following, the French right to disconnect maybe about a year after it came out. I was really interested in it because like I'm a big proponent of like vacation time is vacation time, evenings are mine, weekends are mine. Like there's it's a non-negotiable. I'm South European, right? And we did see in a lot of countries there was a lot of the debate. I think a bunch of countries actually passed it. Portugal was certainly one. I'd say all the Southern European countries were debating it. So I think it's a really good thing. But I think it also brings another interesting point, which is in all this debate of remote and hybrid and in office and out of office, flexible, when we're disconnected, when we're not, what's the role of governments and what's the role that, governmental legislation has? So we have an interesting thing going on now is in the UK, they've had like a right to flexibility and a right to
Yeah.
request flexibility for a while, but that used to come with like a bit of caveats around you can only request it after 26 weeks of that employment. The employer may be able to refute it and all that. A new bill is about to come in. It's passed kind of all the steps. Only the royal shake of hands is the only thing remaining for it to really pass, and that's kind of really bringing it to a whole new level. So it will really look into it's your right from day one. The employer really, really needs to make a very big effort in proving that you can't work flexibly, as they say, no, you can't. What do you think about this bill, and what do you think in general? Is it going to influence more governments the way the French right to disconnect has influenced?
Well, first of all, to me, it was a fairly big surprise that the UK is in the vanguard of leading this. I just didn't expect that from the UK. So overall, this UK bill is great news. And as you pointed out, all that's needed now is essentially the royal assent, check the box, and it becomes law. So what I hope for this bill is that it will be the jolt that will help other jurisdictions, other countries, particularly in Europe, to progress their own legislation. But I'm going to put a twist in this, Irina. What I'd personally love to see is a slight inversion of this kind of work situation. And what I mean by that is that, in other words, that employees are granted the right to work from home, and an employer has to prove that they need to be in the office.
I like that.
Which is
I like
now,
that.
Now, let me be very clear. I know what I'm suggesting is completely unworkable. Okay, I get it. But from a thought process, that mindset might help us to actually move along to the next stage of the development of this evolution of a different way to work. So imagine where an employer has to say, Irina, here is the proof that I'm providing to you, which would indicate that you need to be in the office 2 days a week. All right? That's an altogether different thing, because the employers would have to go off and do the research to show that there's a gain to both the employer and the employee. So all I'm suggesting, I'm not suggesting this that we go ahead and do this, but it's a good exercise for companies to think about, is assume that they've actually got to prove to employees that they need to come to the office. So hats off to the folks in the UK who got this bill through. And I think that countries should watch this one very carefully. And I know, for example, in Ireland, the right to request remote work is probably at the stage where the UK bill was 6 months ago, where it was, you had to be around for 26, like you had we chatted about this before. You had this bullshit where a new employee would technically have to be fully in an office for 26 weeks before they could actually request the right to remote work. So think of it somebody could be living in a rural place. They would suddenly have to come to a city, live and work in the city for 6 months to prove that they could do the job back there. So then they're going to go back there to prove they can do. It makes no sense. It just make it, when you think of it logistically, it's bull. But what it was trying to do was protect the existing employers who were change resistors and who couldn't be dragged along at the speed that change was required. So somewhere in the middle had to be found. And I think there's this tug of love going on in many other countries. So hats off to the UK, and I'm all ears to hear and see what other countries do.
Absolutely. Hopefully, you'll have the impact that Right to Disconnect had. But it's an interesting one. You mention around this, like, you have to prove that you can work remotely, that you can be independent. And I think this comes down to like trust, and ultimately it's all about trust. Like, do you trust people? And what I like about your suggestion around, well, no, it's actually the employers that have to prove that you have to come into the office. I think this aligns nicely with this idea that we've spoken about before, about intentionality. Tell me why I need to be in the office for 2 days. Make a plan for my day where I get my mentoring, I get my upskilling, I get, roadblocks uncovered and stuff. And then you don't have to convince me. I will come on my own accord. But it's almost like the two go together, not just come into the office because I say so. I mean, this is like parenting. I don't want you to do this because I say so. And the toddler is not really going to listen because, like, what does that mean? So I'm gonna back you. I'm gonna back you on that. And I think we'll leave it here. On that note, employers start convincing people why they should be back in the office, and don't do it with like 3 meals a day, because that probably won't work right now. It has to be something more than that. But John, thank you so much, as always, for your honesty, bluntness, and really thoughtfulness on the subject. You certainly live and breathe this, so there's a lot in there. As always, if the listeners have any interesting articles that they want to share with us, please do. You could do it on LinkedIn. You could also just add them to the document in Coda that we share alongside with the show notes. Any way convenient for you. Would certainly love to get some more articles. Again, no shortage, but the more the merrier. But in the meantime, John, stay safe in the wind. Don't get blown off the way your chair did. And I will talk to you next month. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.